So in a previous video, we talked about sharing files off of an Ubuntu server using SMB or Samba to integrate with Windows-based systems. Although Samba can be used in a Linux-only network environment as well through the use of the Samba client. But another way of doing it is using NFS. NFS is native to Linux and Unix. It is, I think, actually a little bit easier to set up on a Linux-based system. You can access files on an NFS share, or an NFS export is the term that they use for it. You can access them from a Windows client if you add in another piece of software for NFS communication. So let's take a look at setting this up. We're going to start by installing the software. So it's going to be, let me get to the right screen here. It's going to be sudo, there we go, sudo apt install, and it's nfs-kernel-server and nfs-common. Now, odds are you already have the NFS common installed on your system, but if you don't, this is how you would install it. And the kernel server obviously is going to be the server component, and the common is going to be the client component. So I'm going to go ahead and finish installing our software, and that should take just a second. Now, while it's installing, what we do with NFS is we create what we call NFS exports. So I'm going to create a folder to hold all of my NFS exports, and this will actually be the root export. And while we won't have people connecting to the root export, it does simplify the NFS management a little bit. So I'm going to make a directory. I'm going to sudo make a directory / and I'm going to call this NFS. And then I'm going to create another one under that, and we'll do one for sales. Now I can add more than that under there if I wanted to as well. Now the NFS is going to be the root export. What people are actually going to connect to is going to be this one here, the sales export, and or whatever else that I created in there. So I am going to go ahead and just open up all permissions on that at the moment, just for the fun of it. /NFS/sales, and that gives nothing if I don't sudo it. There we go. And that should give everyone full control. Okay. Now, the configuration file, the primary configuration file is going to be etc exports. So I want to nano this real quick so we can take a look at it. /etc/exports. And this, there's actually nothing here, just a little bit of information. So it gives a couple of examples. But not a whole lot of data. If you want more data, you would run the command man exports, and that'll pull up the manual page for, or the man pages for exports. And that's where you're going to get most of your documentation. Nevertheless, I want to go ahead and rename this just to get it out of our way. So we're going to mv/etc/exports to /etc/exports.org for our original file. And I'm going to just switch to the root user because I keep forgetting to type sudo. Okay, so now that I've got that original out of the way, let's go ahead and create a new one. So it's going to be man/etc/exports, not man, nano. There we go. Let's edit the file with nano instead of trying to pull up a man page when something doesn't exist. Okay, so now that we've got it, we're going to add just a couple of lines in here. So my first one is going to be /NFS. So this is going to be my /NFS is going to be my root export. Asterisk means I'm going to allow anybody to connect to it. Now I could set specific IP address ranges would be allowed to connect to it while leaving others out. But I'm going to go ahead and leave this asterisk to allow anybody to access it. I want to give read and write permissions, and I'm going to say my FS file system ID equals 0, and that's going to identify this as my root. And then I'll close my parentheses there. Now for the next one, this is when my clients are actually going to connect to. It's going to be NFS/sales. And again, I want to allow everybody to access it. If I wanted to do just a specific address range, say 172.16.10.0, 255, 255, 2550, that would mean somebody would have to be in that address range in order to be able to access it. But I want to go ahead and allow everyone to, so I'm going to do asterisk. I'm going to allow read and write permission, and then I'm going to enter this one, no subtree check. And what that does is that prevents subtree checking. And if you don't put that in, it will still work, although NFS might complain a little bit while it does it. So that just kind of takes care of that. It also takes care of, or stops NFS from looking at the subtree that led to this. So while it'll work without it, putting it in probably still going to be a good idea. Okay, so I can save this. And again, I'd add any other exports that I wanted in here as well. But I'm just doing the one at the moment just to illustrate a simple NFS configuration. So the other thing I'm going to want is I want to set the domain name in my ID mapd file. So this one, let's nano /etc/idmapd.conf. Let's talk about this file real quick before we do. This is going to allow for ID mapping between different systems. So you have a specific user ID on your system. It would be a different user ID on a different system. So ID mapd is used to kind of help map that information. So I'm going to set the domain name here as bassett.local, and this is what you'd want on your other systems as well. And then you can set specific user mappings down here. So I'm not going to need that. So I'm going to go ahead and exit out of my ID mapd file. Okay. Now, I've got my exports created in the etc exports file. I have my mapping in my etc imapd file. So now I'm going to restart my NFS kernel server. So it's systemctl restart nfs-kernel server. And then I'm going to check the status of it and make sure that I didn't typo anything. And we want to see that it's active and running. Okay, there we go. NFS is up and running with that export. Q to quit that. Now, this is going to be a little bit different. I mounted, or I didn't mount, I directly accessed my Samba share using the NFS, or using the Samba client. I'm mixing my technologies here. So with Samba client, I used the Samba server. I used the Samba client software to directly access it. I could also mount a drive on a Samba server. With NFS, I need to mount it, so I don't have a direct access to it. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make a new directory, and it's going to be /mnt/ I'm just putting it in the mnt folder for convenience sake. It doesn't have to go there. But I'm going to do NFS just to identify this as my NFS share. And so to mount it, here's my command. It's going to be mount localhost /sales. So the local host would be the host of whatever machine I'm connecting to. In this case, I'm connecting to myself. That's why I use localhost. I could use the IP address of a remote server, or the name of the remote server if I could do name resolution. And then /sales. Now remember, it was NFS /NFS/sales, but I exported just the sales, so I can connect to that directly without having to connect to the root of NFS. And I'm going to mount that to /mnt/NFS. And that should mount. So now I can go to cd /mnt/NFS. I am on that export. Let me nano test.txt. And this is a sample created on an NFS share. Write it out and exit. And then if I ls-l, we'll see that it's there. Okay, now remember I'm connecting to an NFS server, and I just opened everything up here. So I'm connecting to an NFS server, but I should be able to do an ls-la/nfs/sales, and I'll see right there that file that I just created. So now this is how it would appear to somebody who's connected to it remotely. This is how it appears if I'm looking at the local files on my NFS server. So there we go. A really, really basic, and I do mean really basic, NFS configuration, just to show you that it can be done and give you some ideas of how to start working with it.